Okay, we're going to be going over one of my favorite builds just in general. Something that really shines in PvE, speed farming, high damage, high mobility. Going to be doing decent versus every content in the game. Just something to strive towards if you want one build to kind of play at all times no matter what. This is kind of my go-to just standard style of play. So what it's going to be is kind of a mage ranged caster build that is going to be shining in just staying safe, staying at range, and doing a good job kind of cranking out AoE DPS while having enough mobility to kind of stay out of harm's way and cycling our cooldowns quickly so that we can burst down any kind of content we're having to go through. You can see here doing pretty good DPS, able to kind of cycle through the spells. But where this build's really going to shine is speed farming and doing constant AoE spam. And I'm going to be walking you through everything, like what stat thresholds to look for and all of the different blood and gear and weapons and spells, and we'll deep dive in how to build for success and also play the build properly. I do like to lay things out in an infographic spreadsheet kind of way, and if you ever want access to that kind of stuff, hop on over, join the Discord. I'm going to post it all there, and you can always tag me if you have any questions. And also remember to subscribe, because I'm going to be going in depth on all sorts of guides from beginner to endgame. So let's just go in order through everything, and then after I show how to put the build together, I'll do a little bit more of a deep explanation in terms of how to play the build properly. So we'll go through the chart and just start with blood here. So blood that is going to be really good for this build. Remember, we're playing more as like a ranged mage, AoE, speed clearing, high DPS kind of style. So if you can get your hands on Draculin or Scholar, that's going to be ideal. Either one of those can do really good in this style. Then once you get access to the blood homogenizer, I like to mix Draculin base with a Scholar bonus, because the Draculin base is going to give us spell power and spell crit damage, while also giving us spell crit chance and granting movement speed when we crit. So we're going to be constantly critting. We're spamming at range, constantly critting, and giving ourselves that movement speed buff so that we can still maintain range and mobility, staying away from enemies. Then we're also going to get spell leech, which is actually really amazing. I'll pop up a clip showing you how good the heals can be on spell leech. You just group up some enemies, you're getting low on health, boom, you can easily pop off a couple hundred HP by grouping something up, and it's basically like a free healing potion. It also gives us spell charge game, which is going to help us get more and more free casts more often. And then spell critical strike hits are going to increase spell cooldown by 40% for 3 seconds. Now, I do want to touch a little bit on spell cooldown, because this is going to be one of the more important things to focus on in your build. So if you go to attributes and you scroll down, we're going to see that we're at 32% right now. But I'm kind of diving into the blood and the potions and some of the things we're going to want running while we're playing. So if you can get yourself to like a 30 to 34, somewhere in there on the base build, you're going to be able to get around 38 to 42%, which is going to be ideal, because 40% is the max we can get on our base cooldown. But if you get a temporary buff, like a proc on an effect, like I showed you on the Draculin blood, we can actually go over that 40% and drastically help how fast we're able to cycle through our spells. So let's say I build this perfectly and I've got spell cooldown rate of 40%. Well, then what's going to happen with this Draculin blood, when it procs that 40% increase of spell cooldown, I will actually be able to go to 80. I just can't do it in my base build. So Draculin blood as the base is really optimal for this build, and it's very, very strong. Then for the infusion you want to go with, there's a couple different choices here on the Scholar blood. Both trait 1 and trait 2 are going to be very good, but it's going to depend on where you're sitting with your build. So you can see on trait 2, we get 14% increased spell cooldown. Well, if you're already at like 32 or something, you're going to be wasting a lot of stat roll if you go with that 14% cooldown. So if you're not struggling getting to the cooldown cap, then you want to go with trait 1 and take the spell power and shield efficiency. But a lot of times people are going to be struggling to hit that cooldown cap. So in most cases, probably 80 or 90% of the time, you're going to want to be mixing a Draculin base with the Scholar blood trait 2 to give yourself that 14% spell cooldown, and then also the constant shielding, which is actually really handy, because when you're spamming spells at range constantly, especially utilizing Void like I am, having something with 2 charges, you're going to be keeping that shield up a vast majority of the time, and it's going to help mitigate a lot of damage for you. And that cooldown discussion also stays relevant when discussing which elixir to consume and keep for your uptime on that, because I think there's a couple different choices with this build, and again, it's going to depend on how you're sitting with your cooldown percentage. The elixir of the bat is going to give you spell cooldown rate and spell leech, but if you're already sitting at your spell cooldown cap, then you can go with something like the elixir of the twisted, which is going to give you spell crit chance and spell critical power. So you'll get a lot more DPS. If you're already at the cooldown cap, go ahead and take the twisted elixir. But the first priority is making sure you get as close as possible to that 40% spell cooldown cap. So if you're not at that cap, you're going to want to go with the elixir of the bat. And then you also get spell leech there with the bat elixir, so that's very good as well. And the way that I'm doing the current build, I do need the spell cooldown of trait 2, because I'm showing you right now I'm drinking one without trait 2. I went with the spell power instead. And then what happens, see here in my stats, I'm only at 19% spell cooldown. So I definitely want to take trait 2 to give myself the cooldown, and then we pop that, and it will help me get a lot closer to that cap. Let's drink that, and then you'll see my spell cooldown goes up to the 32%. And then because I'm at 32, I want to drink this elixir of the bat, and that will get me up to 39. And then boom, that's kind of perfect. You want to be around like 38 to 40%. And then you're obviously always going to want to keep your witch potion and rage potion, so basically your spell power and your physical power potions up permanently. If you can, you want to do a good enough job farming to be able to keep those live and online anytime you're going to be leaving your base for a while. So then lastly, in terms of consumables for the build, we have to talk about the weapon coating. Now, with this build, I'm not going to be proccing any weaken or phantasm because I'm not taking advantage of the illusion spell tree. I'm not spamming something like mosquito that would proc that. So I'm going to go with that coating because weaken and phantasm are extremely strong. If you pop up your journal, you'll see that weaken is going to be reducing enemy damage output by 15%. So that's basically a 15% toughness increase. Very, very strong for bosses to take advantage of that weapon coating and keeping that proc live on them. Then also Phantasm is going to be reducing spell cooldowns even further. And remember, those temporary effects can go above our cap. And then you're also getting the spell charge gains, which are going to be helping you cycle through and get more free casts. So let's place that weapon coating, and then now we're good to go. That is the blood and consumables and weapon coating to kind of get started with the build when we're about to go play. So then for gear really quickly, most times you're probably going to want to be going with the Malfeasor set because it's going to give you spell cooldown, spell leech, and then also going to be giving you more spell crit after you veil. So all very useful things for this build. But like I said, if you're able to get to the spell cooldown cap and you don't need that 7% cooldown rate, because remember, we don't want to be at like 46% spell cooldown. If you're wasting percentages of spell cooldown, you could easily go with something just super consistent like Dracula Shadow set, because it's going to be giving you more movement speed and more veil cooldown, which is super handy. So like I said with the other things, just pay attention to that spell cooldown percentage, and probably with this build you're going to go with something like the Malfeasor or the Shadow set. Then for the amulet slot, it's a lot of the same. The Master's Spellweaver amulet is going to be extremely good because you get the spell cooldown. And then I also really love that chance to proc that Lesser Phantom Aegis, which you can see right here is going to be giving you a fairly significant shield and then also inflicting weaken. We talked about how strong weaken is. You're going to be placing that on all enemies, and that's also going to give you the Phantasm, which is going to help you cycle through your spells. So I really like that amulet. It really kind of hits 3 or 4 crucial points for the build. So then talking about the 2 weapon slots, I do like to typically carry both a ranged and a melee weapon when I'm out exploring, farming, boss hunting, whatever. I like to have both a ranged and a melee option. So just kind of like my typical general playstyle when I'm out fighting, I'm going to be equipping the pistols because I can stay at range and do decent damage, not being up in the fray, putting myself at risk while I cycle through all my different spells. And the really strong selling point of the pistols is not only the pretty decent ranged damage they can output, but the E ability is going to give you both iframes and an exploding shot that does AoE damage. You can create space with iframes and then proc an exploding shot right there. That's going to also give you an AoE burst. And then when I pair that with Void right here, there is a dual roll on the Void spell where hitting a target affected by Ignite is going to engulf them, dealing bonus damage and also proccing a bunch of healing ticks on you. So if you place that Ignite with your rolling E shot, Then you cast your void on everything. While it's ignited, you get a couple bursts, and then all of a sudden you start getting healing. You see where my HP is ticking from max right there? That's from the void hitting a target that's already ignited, and then starts proccing those healings on you. So it really helps you to stay topped up, and it synergizes really well with that pistol E ability. But do remember, I'm showing you kind of like the build to strive for and kind of like the end goal. And the synergy I was talking about with the void healing you synergizes with the legendary pistols. Now, it's pretty realistic to target farm legendaries in this game, so it's not too bad, especially if you're spending your shards at the merchant to farm up the legendary pistols that pair with it. But when you're playing through the game and in the more progression phase, you're probably going to have regular pistols, and they're not going to be placing the ignite on the E. It's just going to be more of an exploding bullet, but you do still get the iframes, and then you get this detonation right here where it's still going to do the AoE damage. And for the rolls on the weapons, again, remember, always the priority is going to be spell cooldown. Now, I was able to get enough cooldown from my blood and the other sources within the build that I could skip the spell cooldown on the weapons and go for the movement speed, which helps make up for the mobility that I'm lacking from not going with the shadow set. So I'm getting 8% here instead of the 4% from utilizing the shadow set. So basically I kind of replaced the spell cooldown build with the +8 movement speed, and then I go for the crit chance and the crit power on my spells, and I did that with both weapons, my ranged and my melee. And speaking of the melee weapon that I went with, I did go with the slashers here, and the reason being is they attack really fast. I like attack speed. When you're out farming and you're raiding camps and whatnot, you're breaking those boxes and crates and stuff. You want to be able to swing fast and just kind of go around breaking everything. And then also, there's some really good abilities here on the slashers that synergize with this style. So I kind of want to keep distance as a caster. What I can do here with the slashers on the Q ability, I can dive in, do some damage, back out, and heal. So that's really kind of like exactly what I'm looking for. And so I can show you this a little bit better. I went and damaged myself a little bit really quickly. So you'll be able to see when I dash in and back out, boom, I get a 26 heal there basically for free because I'm generating automatic space and I'm coming back to get further away, and I'm healing basically for free. We dive in, we heal, and we're backing out. But then also on the slashers, the E ability right here, if you attack while you're camouflaged, like before it wears off. So when I cast this E ability, I'm going to get a timer there on the bottom left of 3, 2, 1. And if I attack, I'm going to inflict a vampiric curse on the next hit. And what that's going to do is deal 100% damage and then leech 30% health after 3 seconds. So let's watch this. I'm going to proc that E, and then I'm going to make sure to hit. Boom. You can see that vampiric curse placed right there. And then boom, I got that 19 heal. So the slashers give you a couple different options to both generate space and then hide yourself and also do a little bit of healing. But honestly, I don't really use the E ability here on the slashers, the camouflage, to heal. It's not like it's some massive epic heal. I kind of prioritize it as a way to generate space and get away so I can kind of stay safe and buy myself some seconds to let my spell cooldowns reset. But I know a lot of you out there who are kind of learning the game, you don't want to be weapon swapping a lot, and that's no big deal. You can just equip your pistols and stay at range and fight things with your regular left click and your spells and your E for iframes. And then if you want to finish off a bunch of low HP targets, you can do your Q ability and just kind of channel a bunch of DPS that way. So if you just want to do one weapon in the fight, do your pistols and you'll be just fine most times. Then later on, if you want to start getting more fancy, you're more comfortable with the build, you can start doing things like swap over to your slashers, dash in, heal, and then back out with your fading camouflage. So now let's talk about the spell options on our casting bar. And I just realized I didn't put my veil on the sheet, so I will go ahead and add that. So if you join the Discord and you get the sheet from there, the veil will be on there. I do like the Veil of Illusion because it's going to be helping me get more mobility. What I can do with the Veil of Illusion is I can kind of get 2 dashes. I can dash in, do whatever I want, and then be able to return, and I get a little bit more of maneuverability within the fight. So I can kind of move twice instead of just dashing once and being done with it. And I think the 3 things you're going to want to prioritize for your jewel on the Veil of Illusion is going to be the bottom 3 that you see right here. Increase the duration by 20%, obviously amazing. Next primary attack inflicts Fading Snare. That is very good because you're going to be able to slow them down, and that's going to help you keep space even better. And then we talked about how great stacks of Phantasm are with this casting build. So those bottom three, very great. The top one there of detonating your illusion for damage, it does inflict weaken and it's okay, but it does prioritize managing the recast properly and all that, which is going to be hard to kind of remember when you're in a stressful situation, and making sure to, because like my priority with the Veil of Illusion is getting space. So trying to make sure I'm constantly recasting the ability before it expires and making sure to get the effect of that proc isn't something that I want to have to manage while I'm fighting. So the top one is replaceable, but those bottom three are very good. Then Bone Explosion. I think this is one of the best skills in the game. I use this a lot of times in many different builds. It's just such an amazing initiator because what Condemn does is it's going to increase your damage output. As you see right here, increasing all damage dealt to them by 15% for 5 seconds. You can basically keep it up permanently when you've got a really good cycle of your cooldowns and you're constantly going to be getting that 15%. And then also when you are doing mass AoE farming, like when you're farming for the shards over in Mortium, you're going to be constantly killing things that are condemned, and you're always going to be summoning these skeletons to fight beside you when you're killing a condemned target. And what they do is not only they do a little bit of trickle DPS, killing low HP targets, but they also soak up aggro when things are attacking your skeletons instead of you. So Bone Explosion is just so amazing in so many different ways, both single target for proccing the Condemn, that's going to help you increase your damage output, but also for AoE speed farming, constantly finishing things off with your skeletons and soaking up aggro. Now, for the jewels on Bone Explosion, some people really like to go with range as one of their roles, and I do think that's very strong. So there are 5 pretty good choices here on Bone Explosion. I've kind of gotten used to playing around the normal range, so I don't have to go with it super often, but if I was building this for like a PvP specialty build, I probably would go with range because it's harder to close the distance on human opponents that are good at the game. So PvP, you probably want to be going for the range instead of something like a second explosion. But for PvE, I don't really need it. I've learned how to play the game PvE without that 20% bonus range. So I went with spawning a Nova of projectiles. Again, it's just amazing for AoE farming. Reducing cooldown, obviously great. Damage, obviously great. And then a second explosion is going to be just more DPS output. So all 4 of those are very handy. But like I said, remember range is also a good option as well. And then you see these explosions, they are going to have a pretty good range and they're going to hit from kind of far away. So if I cast it right here, bang, look at that. It went all the way over here to this on the bottom left, and it also inflicted Condemn. So yeah, this is kind of the setup I go here for just the standard one-size-fits-all jewel setup on Bone Explosion. And then for my second spell, I went with Void. I think this is a super underrated spell because you can basically just spam it constantly, keep things ignited, healing you, and then you're also going to be doing just a mass coverage of the whole battlefield with constant AoE damage. And again, on this one, I didn't go with range because I'm used to playing around that range threshold that's just kind of normal in the game. Like you'll see here, I can kind of get myself into a position where I know the wall is going to be the end of my range. I'm saying it's about like right here. So yeah, if I cast, yep, Bone Explosion, it ends right at the wall. I just kind of have a feel for it being about that far from the top of my screen, and that's going to be the max range I can kind of hit. And I've just gotten used to kind of playing around that. So again, on the Void, I didn't go with range, but it is a really good option if you get a really good jewel that has range on it or something. It's super useful. But for me, on this build, I went with the spawning, the 3 exploding fragments. It's just more AoE damage. Flames engulfing, dealing damage. Again, more AoE farming, and then also increased damage, 20%, can't go wrong. And then hitting a target affected by Ignite. We talked about that on the pistols. What we're going to be able to do is, even if we don't use our pistol E to proc the Ignite that's going on right here, we don't have to, because what we can do is, remember, we get 2 charges on Void. So the first charge of Void is going to ignite, and then the second one that I hit with is going to start healing me. You can see those max HPs popping up. So you don't even have to get super fancy, like rolling around with your pistol, proccing it, then healing with Void. Because you get 2 charges, it's just going to kind of passively happen because of that jewel. Then with the ultimate, it's kind of a bummer in V Rising that we can't do jewels on our ultimates. I really hope they add that at some point with a big patch, because it would be a lot of fun to be able to customize some of these epic ultimates they have in the game. But for me, on an ultimate, when I'm just kind of playing in general, I'm looking for something I can just cast and be done with it. There's a lot of really good ultimates that would make sense within this build, but I hate having to like aim my ultimate or stand still and channel, or I'm channeling my ultimate and then the boss dashes at me, knocks me out of my ultimate, and I just wasted my ultimate getting absolutely nothing for it. I really like the Army of the Dead because I'm able to just get automatic passive value. I'm going to inflict condemn on everything kind of in the area. I'm going to summon 8 different minions. They're going to soak up a bunch of aggro. They're going to output a lot of damage for 7 seconds, and it's really going to help me initiate a really tough fight. So when I'm out farming Mortium for the shards and all that, I really like to make sure I have my Army of the Dead up for the boss engagement, and it just makes it infinitely easier because I can come in, proc condemn, soak up all that aggro, and I can basically get the boss half dead within that first 7 seconds just by spamming all my abilities with Army of the Dead, doing damage and soaking everything up. And then I'm going to dive into some fighting and some action of showing you how to play this build successfully. But remember I talked about on the Draculan Blood, we're going to be getting spell critical strike hits are going to increase spell cooldown by 40% for 3 seconds. That is super epic. Now remember, our cap is 40%. We can't go over that. But we can go over that if it is a temporary buff that we proc from a spell. So watch this right here. Bang. Look at that. We went from 39 to 79. And that does actually help our cooldowns cycle faster. And that buff does show up down on the bottom left. It's going to be called concentration. And it's right here. The spell critical strikes increasing your spell cooldown. Okay, now let's talk about engaging enemies and how to play this build optimally. You'll see I'm coming up to kind of a normal type setup you're going to see in the game a lot when you're roving around, raiding a camp or whatever, about this many enemies. We want to start by proccing Bone Explosion to get that Condemn proc, which is going to give us more damage output and skeletons when we kill something. So I'll start with Bone Explosion, I'll spam Voids, then I can roll in and finish everything off like that. Or I can use my E to create space, proc an Exploding Shot if there's like one thing left that's a tough enemy, and boom, be able to kill them just like that. All right, then let's show another engagement, and I am on Brutal. It's just this build is very strong when you've got it built very optimally and you've got kind of the rolls that you want maxed out. So I'm able to kill everything super fast, but I'll kind of show you how to manage another fight here. And remember, we're going to start with Bone Explosion. We're going to generate space if we need it after we spam our Voids. So Bone Explosion, Voids. Let's make sure we've got space. We're not going to get hit by something. And if not, we can dash in and then channel to finish everything off with our pistols. But if there was a threat and something happening, I would use my pistol E to generate some space and then fire back at them after I dash. Okay, now let's pop into the arena and I'll show you kind of a slower single target fight that has a lot of HP, and then we'll do a boss fight that is more difficult, like a primal boss here from the summoning circle. So again, remember, we're always going to engage with Bone Explosion, then we're going to drop our Void Ignitions, and then we're going to keep space. We don't ever want to be without both our Veil and our Pistol E. We're going to get out of the way, Pistol E, and now he's going to be burrowing, and we're going to need a dash to get out of the way. Oh, we don't need to actually. And then remember, Bone Explosion, Veils, space with pistols, Exploding Shot, lots of DPS, and boom, they are down just like that, very fast and efficiently. Just remember to always keep your space, cycle through, initiate with Bone Explosion, and you should be just fine. And then remember, don't ever have your Pistol E and your dash both off cooldown at the same time. You want to use one and then wait a little bit so that you can dash, and then by the time your dash is going to be finished up, you're going to be cycling back through to your pistol. So right here, I can get out of the way by using my Entangling Shot, generating space, and doing a little bit of damage. Okay, now let's show versus a more boss fight scenario versus a primal Blood Soul. We're going to initiate with Bone Explosion, cast our ultimate. Let's make sure we're getting space because they're going to start doing stuff typically after we initiate. We're just going to keep spamming our Voids. We're going to get out of the way. We can recast to go back. We don't want to use our E. We want to kind of like maintain space right now. We can E out of the way when something's going to hit us. Dash, get out of the way. Now this boss does throw a lot at you, so you're going to want to be taking advantage of your healing, your E ability, and then we're going to save our dash for when he's going to be proccing stuff like that at us. Remember, we can go to our slashers, and we can hit E to get out of the way, generate space, and then spam our abilities here, get out of the way, We can switch over to our slashers and dive in to finish him off right here. Boom, boom, boom. If I needed to, melee. But we're able to kind of get enough sustain and healing and keep space and have enough iframes that, I mean, you're typically going to take damage unless you're like some god player that's able to no-hit bosses and you really practice memorizing the mechanics over and over. But with this build, it's okay if you take a little bit of damage because you're going to be having another iframe or dash coming off cooldown very soon. And remember, we're synergizing a lot of different heals within our build to give us sustain. So you can always just kind of like run away, back up, and let some of this stuff come off cooldown, proc your ignites, start those healing ticks, and you'll be okay. And then worst case scenario, you can always use a healing potion. You've got enough abilities to kind of get space and back out, and then give yourself room to use a healing potion. So yeah, I hope this video helped you out. And remember, if you want to join the Discord to ask any questions or have access to any of the sheets that I've built for resources, absolutely no problem. Head on over there and just tag me. I'll be happy to provide that for you. And remember to subscribe because I'm going to be doing a lot of in-depth guides here from beginner to end game here on the channel. So cheers. Have a good one. Peace.